this is Pat Lynch, and you are listening and watching the Career Pathways Podcast, brought to you from the Lyon College KILT studio, deep in the basement of the Maybe Simpson Library. Joining me is
Dr. Robert Miller
and
Producer Cheyenne.
Producer Cheyenne. You don't see her, but she's back there at the board making the magic happen. So, hello, Rob. How are you?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
Oh, this is fine. You know, psychology is some of our favorite guests, and we actually have in KILT Studio we have Hannah and Kari. They do a whole psyched podcast as well. So the psychology is getting a lot of love here at the KILT Studio. Yes. Well, great way we start is just a general question about, tell us about yourself, kind of where you're from, kind of what led you eventually to be here at Lyon College.
Yes, the long answer. I'm originally I grew up in northern Illinois.
Yep.
So Rockford, Illinois, specifically, right at like close to the state line between Illinois and Wisconsin.
Now, is that Wayne's World or?
Maybe I don't know.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. I digress.
So my undergrad was right in that region. I went to Northern Illinois University up in DeKalb, Illinois, so about 30 minutes or so from where I grew up, and about like 60 minutes outside of Chicago. I did my bachelor's in psychology there, and then from there went to the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana, and I did a developmental psychology degree there for 5 years. And then after that, I moved here to Arkansas and started at Lyon about 7 years ago in the fall of 2018.
So you freshly minted PhD, and then you came here to
went from ABD, about to dissertate, right to Lyon that following fall.
Well, looking back, in undergrad, was that your intent all along to be in academia and be a professor, or did you kind of entertain other things?
I did entertain other things for a little bit. I cycled through at least one other major and like several other like tentative majors where I was like, maybe this is what I'm going to switch to. I actually started off as an English major.
Okay.
Early on. So took a few English classes, and then I took intro to sociology in my sophomore year, and also intro to psych. And then I kind of like wavered between those for a little bit, where I had a really great sociology professor, Jerry Crane, who I really liked. I liked the work that he did. He loaned me a lot of books, which was always a good way to get my interest. So almost a sociology major, but ultimately I ended up deciding to go with a psychology major. And then shortly after that, I was pretty set on the idea of pursuing an academic career. So
in psychology, what is kind of your academic focus, and kind of what type of research do you like to do?
Yeah, so I'm trained as a developmental psychologist. Specifically, so Notre Dame had multiple tracks for developmental psychology, or concentrations, kind of. So you could pick from a few different ones. I picked developmental psychopathology, which is specifically like it's abnormal psych essentially, but also with sort of a developmental focus on top of it. So it's study of
kind of break that all down for us?
Yeah,
because it's like I hear it and I always nod my head, but then it's like I don't think I quite know.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. No. So the psychopathology is the study of abnormal psych or psychological disorders. And so much of the time, the focus for people who are interested in that is a clinical focus, right?
Right.
It's really looking at like, how do we treat those disorders? How do we reduce symptoms or handle symptoms, or teach people to cope with those symptoms? So it's really very treatment focused usually. For developmental psychopathology, the idea is less on treatment and more on like, how do these things come about in the first place?
Okay.
So like, what are risk factors that might lead to a specific developmental outcome, like, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or depression, or even things like schizophrenia? Are there environmental things? Are there familial things that might lead to those disorders developing? And then sometimes the focus is also on intervention. So like,
Right.
but like, you know, early intervention, are there large scale things that we can do to maybe like reduce rates of poverty that might downstream have effects on the development of disorders? It's really more the study of
Yeah.
and the treatment of.
You know, a lot of that, when I hear like treatment, it makes me think more of like psychiatry, and because then treatment would be medicine, where psychology, you know, and this is a novice speaking, but it's more just patients talking through their problems, maybe cognitive behavior therapy, things along that way to kind of help them. How does that all work in your area of specialization?
Yeah, I mean, so that distinction that you're describing definitely does exist,
Yeah.
where, you know, psychiatry is it's a medical degree, and then medical specialization, and often psychiatrists, although certainly psychiatrists can, you know, give psychotherapies as well. Many of them do focus more on psychopharmaceutical treatments, medications, and things like that. And on the flip side, people who are trained in clinical psychology often give psychotherapy, and although there are some states where also they can prescribe psychoactive medication. So there is a lot of overlap. And, you know, even if you look at like, you know, famous psychologists or psychiatrists, people like Sigmund Freud, for example, technically a psychiatrist, right? Had medical training, but was really well known for doing talk therapies for psychoanalysis.
Yeah. So. Now, with all of that, what kind of research then do you pursue, you know, with that kind of interest?
Yeah, so my interest personally was always in the kind of intersection between family dynamics and then mental health outcomes. And so even more specifically, often it's parenting related. So I'm kind of interested in like how different styles of parenting, how different parenting behaviors, how different pressures on parenting might result in different behaviors, and how that kind of interacts with various forms of psychopathology. So I've looked at things like maternal depression, maternal ADHD was a big one that I did fairly early on, but also looked at how, like, you know, just parents of kids who have ADHD, for example, how, you know, sometimes those stresses interact in such a way that it might create potentially problematic parenting behaviors, or maybe fewer positive parenting behaviors. That was actually one of the things that I looked at in my dissertation, was like how maternal depression and parenting stress for moms of kids with ADHD, how those factors interacted to create parenting stress, and then how parenting stress in turn predicted parenting that was less warm, less affectionate, and also more controlling and manipulative.
And I'm certain that must have changed over generations, because I can just think of my grandparents. You know, that was, you know, not a lot of hugging. You know, that was, you know, it was, and, you know, and it's like you got an issue, get a tissue. You know, that's you know, it was just like that's about as far as they would go. My parents kind of were slightly different, but, you know, it was kind of like their parents. They were overwhelmed. They had households of like 8 children. Yeah, we had the typical Irish Catholic medium-sized family of only 5.
Only 5.
And so then I look at just how, you know, my wife and I, how, you know, we had one child, and just how so different that is. And so, you know, just like even you mentioned like ADHD, you know, parenting probably, you know, go back a decade, 2 decades ago, it probably wasn't even recognized. And so then how do parents manage that?
Yeah, I think that's shifted a lot in the last century in particular, and then the later half of the 20th century is where we see a lot of those kind of societal changes start to filter into parenting. I teach a psych of parenting class, and one of the first things that we do is we spend about 2 weeks talking about the history of the parent-child relationship, like how that's changed over time. And like, if you look, you know, first of all, there's not as much information about like how people parented their kids, because it wasn't as much of a focus. Part of that might have been due to, like, you know, very high child mortality rates. You know, if you look at like the colonial U.S., for example, like, you know, it wasn't unusual for, you know, like 1 in 5, 1 in 4 kids to, you know, maybe not make it to that first year. And so like parental attachment was often kind of a little bit more of a removed thing. Because you never knew which kids were going to make it in the first place. And also people had like kind of incorrect assumptions about like what kids were like for the longest time. Like, you know, it was a pretty novel concept when, you know, people like Sigmund Freud in like the late 1800s, the early 1900s comes about and is like, yeah, I think like kids are qualitatively different than adults, and they're going to get there through development, right? But like, you know, a young child, a infant or a toddler, they're not just like a little adult that you just need to give information to and discipline until they're an adult, right? They actually see the world very differently. The things that they're struggling with are things that adults have a hard time remembering or wrapping their heads around. And so that was like a pretty seismic shift in like how we saw kids. Yeah, obviously a lot of his ideas were incorrect about kids as well, but it kind of set the stage for like later theories of development and like trying to better learn like what's actually going on with children and like how they're qualitatively different than, you know, adults, and also qualitatively different than kids at different ages or teenagers, for example. So
with all this body of knowledge, is just this is a kind of a I don't know how to best say it, but is parenting in general getting better?
I think so. Yeah. I think over the course of especially the 20th century, as we see childhood mortality decrease, you know, a lot of that is due to like better public health, vaccines, things like that have reduced childhood mortality over time. I think also like, you know, like economic things in developed countries are not as dire as they once were. And so like, you know, because of that, people can focus more on their kids, and also education has improved. And so people often, I mean, is it perfect? No. Or people's understanding of development, is it perfect? There's probably still a long way we could go, but it's certainly a lot better than it was, you know, in the 1700s or the early 1800s. People get kids a lot better. And there's also like more public services to kind of like train parents or intervene when you see things like abuse and neglect, which just simply didn't exist prior to like the 1900s. So I'd say overall things have improved. There's still a ways to go though.
Yeah. The what, like if you looked at the young adult child or young adult population, what percent would be accurately diagnosed with ADHD?
With ADHD, that estimate is tough to pin down. It's one of those things where you've got sort of more liberal estimates, more conservative estimates. It depends a little bit on like what set of diagnostic criteria you're using. So like if you're using the DSM's criteria, often about 4 or 5% is kind of the number that people cite. Sometimes you see lower numbers as well. There's also always that concern when it comes to ADHD. Some people are concerned that like, is it overdiagnosed, or is, you know, sometimes are we misdiagnosing things that, you know, maybe we're looking at like an autism spectrum disorder, but it's being confused for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder instead. But I'd say like somewhere between like the 3 and 5% is probably a solid estimate. Yeah,
because I'm not going to kind of go RFK on you or anything like that, but I remember our daughter, we moved to Atlanta. She was in kindergarten, and they were asking us about ADHD because she was fidgety, and she'd finish her assignments very quickly and then go walk up, you know, leave her desk to go get a book or something. And it was kind of like, oh, you know, kind of a little unruly. I mean, they wanted, you know, nice, quiet, polite, sit in your chair type students, and it never worked out. But you know, I just saw that it was just so difficult, you know, for them to kind of diagnose it. I mean,
it is. It is one of those, and again, like, you know, I think sometimes our expectations of young children are maybe unrealistic as well. Right. That's certainly a thing that can happen. You know, certainly people have ADHD. It is a very debilitating disorder much of the time. And, you know, also sometimes maybe we have kind of unrealistic expectations of what young children should be doing. And if you're expecting a 4 or a 5-year-old to sit in a chair for a long time doing worksheets and things like that, you know, so sometimes maybe that plays a role in people's expectations of what kids should be like.
Yeah. How does that, ADHD relate to Ritalin? Because Ritalin prescriptions seem, like it's you were saying 4 or 5%. I don't think that matches up with the percent of students that that were taking Ritalin. Because background, like in suburban Atlanta, where I kind of where we raised our daughter, it was just that it became almost like a study aid. It was kind of like the worst aspects of competitive parenting, that they would just start to get this a Ritalin prescription, and it was just something to increase focus, to do well on a test. Kind of, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, Ritalin and Adderall are stimulant medications.
Yes, yeah.
They do work really well for ADHD. They're very effective. Again, especially if you've got somebody who's got very severe ADHD, that stimulant might be what they really need to kind of help them focus. And it is a little bit counterintuitive. Sometimes this comes up in like abnormal psych or child psychopathology, where students are like, I don't know, if you're already hyper, why does a stimulant, something that makes you more active, why does that help? And the answer is, like, stimulants really help you to focus.
Yeah.
And a lot of ADHD, like, we could kind of describe it less as like hyperactivity and more as like a difficulty focusing in the first place, and like filtering out extraneous stimuli. And so stimulants do kind of help with that sort of like honing in of attention.
Yeah.
Now, stimulants are also misused a lot of the time, or taken recreationally or taken as study drugs, because just like they can help people with ADHD focus who really need that extra help and that medication, they also can technically keep people kind of awake and focused even if they don't have a prescription for it. And of course, that's one of those things that's it's not a recommended practice. It's something that's potentially dangerous and kind of opens up the door to addiction and dependency. But the efficacy is probably still there for many individuals.
Yeah. What research are you doing right now in the present?
So currently, I've pivoted a little bit since being at Lyon, and my current research focuses a lot on something called helicopter parenting. That it's also called overparenting, but helicopter parenting is kind of the colloquial term for it. It's the one people are most familiar with. And so basically what helicopter parenting refers to is parenting practices that are overly intrusive, overly controlling, and I think most importantly, developmentally inappropriate. So parenting is one of these interesting things where, like, it isn't rather the parent-child relationship. It's not really like a static relationship. It's not always going to be exactly the same. And there are some eras of development, some times in childhood where, relatively high levels of control, structure, routine, those are really things that, if we're looking at like preschool kids, for example, or kindergartners, often, again, within the context of a warm and loving parent relationship, that can actually be somewhere where a kid that age can really thrive with a lot of those rules and expectations. But as kids get older, you kind of have to take the training wheels off, right? So parents have to kind of step back that control. They have to hope that some of those expectations and rules have been internalized a little bit, because, by the time you hit like adolescence or emerging adulthood, which is what we call like late adolescence through like the early 20s, you kind of hope that people have learned a lot of those lessons already. And maybe you're not, benefiting a child by continuing to exert control, continuing to have rules, continuing to like hover and intervene. An example that I sometimes like to use is like, you expect when you've got a 2 or a 3 or a 4-year-old, you're going to have to remind the kid to stop picking their nose, right? Like that's something and you might have to intervene. You might have to move their hand away occasionally, be like, okay, we don't do that. By the time that they're 14, 15, 16, you hope you don't have to keep reminding them and keep moving their hand away, right? You hope that they just have internalized it. They know the rule. They understand why it's important and why it's not socially acceptable to do that, right? And so you kind of hope that a lot of the rules and lessons that you are trying to instill in a kid, by the time you hit, 16, 17, 18, 19, those are kind of learned, and you can kind of take off those training wheels. But sometimes that's challenging for parents. Some parents have a hard time with that, like, transition from late adolescence to adulthood. And, a lot of this comes from like a place of caring, right? Parents don't want to They don't want to see their kids struggle. They don't want to see their kids fail.
Right.
They don't want to see them uncomfortable or unhappy. And that's a really understandable
Right.
parental instinct, right? Is to not subject your kids to those sorts of things. And at the same time, discomfort, failure, struggle, those are things that are just realities of adult life. And so, like, you know, if you're not giving an emerging adult opportunities to navigate those things, to sometimes fall a little bit and have to kind of pull themselves back up or find the right people to help them back up. If you're, you know, protecting them from everything, then, you know, you might hit a point where, you know, they're entering the adult workforce and, you know, maybe the training wheels haven't come off and they haven't figured out how to ride the bike at this point. And then it might actually impair them or become a problem. So,
Yeah, because it's the intention's well.
Yeah.
But what I've seen, and I kind of mentioned this, but where I was calling it competitive parenting, that I saw, like, kind of where my daughter was raised, there was that children also were status. And so, you know, my son or daughter has, you know, 4 AP classes. How about yours?
Yeah.
You know, you know, you know, where they ended up going to college, you know, then it's a metric on who's the better parent, you know, but you know, just, you know, here it is, they went to this summer camp, you know, where'd you go? No, they just sat around all summer. Oh, okay, yeah. And it was
like
all
some judgment and status tied to it.
Yeah, it was terrible. And my wife, it would just drive her absolutely insane, you know, because it was just, you know, that, she was the furthest from kind of helicoptering or programming, you know, it was just, and it worked out well because, you know, our daughter turned out to, you know, be the independent, you know, woman we wanted. But do you explore that at all as far as the, you know, the full range of why parents do that? Because, I think, there's all these other things that, you know, that they're using that's children as far as reflection of them.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting that you asked that, because I do actually have a study we're about to start data collection on that is focused on the parents of college students and kind of asking them, like, you know, what is the motivation if you do over control? Like, first of all, like, how common is this sort of parenting? I think, you know, we might have a trend to think this thing is more common than it actually is. So first of all, like, how common is it? Are more parents kind of hands off, or are more of them kind of hovering? And then for those who are hovering, like, what is the motivation? Because there are studies out there that kind of try to hint at what those motivations are. You know, some studies are like, maybe it's a vicarious living thing where, like, you know, maybe a parent didn't have the experience that they wanted in college. And so they're like, you know, when I was in school, I wish I had done this, this, and this. I wish I had, you know, joined that fraternity and played that sport and taken this major, and you should do these things now. And for some, maybe it's just like anxiety about safety. And so you've got, like, you know, parents who, you know, they've read all of these scary headlines about this school or this school, and they're like, you know, I'm going to make sure the dorm is safe, and you know, I'm going to make sure that they're not out late, and I'm going to make sure that they're, you know, not exposed to drugs or alcohol. And so that's the focus. And then, you know, for other parents, it might just be that they, you know, really want their kids to be successful, and maybe they don't really trust them enough to do it themselves. And so they're like, you know, if I can just get you to the job, then I'm going to try to do that, right? Even if it means that maybe I'm removing a lot of the challenges that you would otherwise kind of trip over or have to struggle through yourself.
Well, we have a test subject here, producer Cheyenne. Kind of, what's your observations as far as, like, helicopter parenting? And because I don't know what your parents are like, but
definitely not helicopter parents.
Okay, but you see this with others though, right? Friends or not really?
Kind of with one of my siblings. My stepmom likes to always be there.
Yeah.
When he's doing, like, everything. And just
how
always
about
on.
Since you've been here at Lyon, you seen any incidents of overly involved parents?
I wouldn't say so.
Okay. Well, we have a healthy, well-adjusted camp.
That's always good.
I don't see anybody's parents, at least.
But you know where we will see it is I've I manage on-campus employment. I have received calls from parents to help find something for the job. Okay, it's first year advising. They receive
They definitely
calls,
do.
and just the whatever, if things aren't going well, why, it's just all that. I don't know, like, if all in athletics, if the coaching staff hears from parents
Has
or
the
not.
same issue, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. So it's there. As a psychologist, and you have a helicopter parent, how do you help them?
The parent or the student is the
Good
question,
question.
too, right? Yeah.
Because the student may be like end up being dependent, and so okay, yeah,
I think, a key, especially from the student's
Yeah.
perspective, is like learning how to communicate,
Right.
and like how to have those conversations with parents, and maybe like when to draw boundaries.
Right.
Because like one of the studies that we recently published, I think last January, in fact, is when this one came out, showed that like when you see people who they have the perception that their parents are hovering, they're overparenting, they often experience higher rates of depressive symptoms, higher rates of anxiety. So it's like, it's certainly not helping mental health, it seems, to kind of have that hovering. And maybe that's what parents think is happening, right? I do think helicopter parenting is generally well-intentioned. And so maybe parents just don't realize sort of the negative impact that hovering and that like prompting and checking is having, and that it's kind of making their kids kind of always look over their shoulder. And so like college students learning how to have that conversation with parents and being like, hey, I'd appreciate a little bit of space, a little bit of time, like let me make a mistake. I'm going to come to you if I really need help, but I just kind of need to figure this out on my own for now.
Right.
Those sorts of conversations might be important to have, even if they're uncomfortable. From the parent's perspective, I think messaging that could help would just be like, you're trying to help. We get it. We understand. But like, did you know it doesn't help? Right. Like
Right.
it's often not having the kinds of impacts that they think that it is. So, for example, we looked at things like GPA as one of our outcomes. Like, our college students who are being helicoptered, do they have better academic performance? Because that's probably one of the things that helicopter parents are aiming for. And the answer was no.
Really?
Right? There was
I
no
would've-
significant. So
I would
they
have said yes.
they did not have higher academic performance. They didn't have higher academic self-efficacy, which is like basically your feeling that you can get stuff done in school. Like you can handle the readings, you can do the assignments, you can pass the class. That wasn't higher either, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, some of those things like academic self-efficacy were a little bit lower among that group of students who were helicoptered. So they had a little bit less confidence in their skills than other students did.
Well, if somebody's doing it for you, it's hard to build that confidence.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, which I could see that.
Yeah.
I would have swore that students with heavily involved parents would have higher GPAs because they'd be, they're the ones that would be going to after school tutoring. They're the ones that they have the SAT, ACT prep.
Right.
And
I would expect that as well.
Yeah.
Right? At least in that particular study, that wasn't what we found. We found no effect. So I think the fact that it's not helping and maybe it's even hurting a little bit. Like certainly if we're looking at mental health outcomes and things like that, it doesn't seem to be having a positive effect. Maybe better knowledge that that's how it often turns out would kind of help parents to see things differently.
Now you have a group of helicopter parents here in the studio, and you tell them that it has no impact on higher GPAs. Will they believe you, and will they change?
That's always the question, right?
Yeah. Well, what are your thoughts?
I mean, there's always that challenge of scientific communication, right?
Right.
I found this thing, and then getting that out to the public. First of all, there's always that barrier between here's what the scientific community knows, regardless of what science we're looking at, and here's kind of what the public knows. There's always that delay as well. And then there's always like those, people have a tendency to kind of make exceptions for themselves a lot of the time and be like, okay, like I can acknowledge that for a lot of people this might be the case, but it's not the case in my specific
Right.
situation, right?
Yeah.
It might not be helping some kids.
Yeah,
but I
that's
feel like
them,
it's still
but for
helping
me, it works, yeah.
That's always a difficult thing to kind of talk people through, is that bias, that their own, perception of things might be a little bit warped.
Yeah. Besides yourself, who is kind of the prominent voices in parenting right now?
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, who is it that, because there, if it, Dr. Spock long ago, but I can't think of any prominent like voices where something like that could maybe really do get through if it's somebody influential enough.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting question. I can't think of a good name off the top of my
Yeah.
head. I do think that we've often had voices that maybe haven't been the best.
Right.
A notorious one that I go through with my students is John Watson, the famed behaviorist from like the early 20th century. After he left Johns Hopkins University, he then kind of like went on this tour. He was showing up on radio shows. He was writing a lot of popular press books. And one of the popular press books he wrote was on parenting, even though at the time this wasn't really something that he had even studied. He kind of took these behaviorist principles that he had studied and was like, well, if I were studying parenting, here's some stuff. And so he published this book about like, how to kind of be really hands off and not very affectionate to kids, and like, be very business-like with them. One of his recommendations that I always show students that I think is funny is he's like, shake their hand like you would an adult, pat them on the head, and that's enough affection. You don't need any more than that. You don't want to like train them to be too soft.
He wasn't hugged enough as a child.
Clearly not, right? And so yeah, like those ideas, but those ideas had like lasting impacts, right? Like the idea of like crying it out for infants who are in a crib, like those ideas trace their roots back to like those
Just
earliest
shut the door, let them,
ideas.
hug.
Yeah. So some really unfortunate things. So I can think of examples where those voices that maybe shouldn't have been heard were heard, and then that had kind of like lasting impacts on the way that we perceive parenting.
Oh, that's, it's frightening, but given the time and context, it was okay.
A lot of people were very open to that idea.
Yeah.
Of like things being more hands off. There was also like notoriously B.S. Skinner designed an operant conditioning chamber for infants called the air crib, which was basically like this enclosed crib environment with like a roll of paper so you could change out
a little cause and
the
effect,
lining.
Let's test the different stimuli.
And I was like, this will be the perfect place to raise your kid in this like plexiglass case. So yeah, some bizarre ideas again, certainly in like the mid 20th century or so.
Cheyenne, you getting some potential parenting ideas for the future? That's scary. Oh man, but it's like Skinner. Oh yeah, well-known, psychologist.
Yeah.
He was a
he was a psychologist. Very prominent voice.
Yeah. And well, I come across him in marketing. That's because you get the stimuli and effect.
Yeah.
And so, all like with Pavlov and all them, they all had that around messaging. But that's pretty scary
It's
stuff.
pretty harrowing, right?
Yeah. Dramatic change of subject. Core 100.
Yeah.
Let's talk that. What is Core 100 here at Lyon, and what is the objective and purpose of having Core 100?
So Core 100 is our first year seminar class. It's a 1-credit course. We offer a series of them every fall, usually about 15 to like maybe 18 different sections, all with like kind of bespoke novel topics attached to them. We can get into those topics in just a second as well. But like the overall goal of the Core 100 program, it's got a few. So the first goal I would say is to kind of help first year students attached to faculty members, like get to know a faculty member who otherwise might be sort of intimidating. They're at the front of a lecture hall. They're there for, you see them in this intense, difficult class a few times a week, and that might be a more intimidating setting than the smaller class where we aim for like 12 to 15 students per section typically, where they're talking about something that's less intimidating, more exciting, an interest that you share with that individual, and so it's kind of supposed to open that door to interactions with faculty. That's kind of our our first goal. Second goal is, we would like to sort of kindle an enthusiasm for like academic learning, right? And again, that's kind of done through those interesting novel topics. So, one of the things is that students get to usually pick like either their top choice or like their top few choices for their Core 100 section, and then we do our very best to make sure that they get into a section that they're interested in. So they've got this often sort of different novel concept. So for example, my class that I've done for like the last 5 or 6 years is something called psychology of horror. And so we look into horror movies and like why they're scary.
Why do people like them?
Why do people like them is a big question. We spend like a week trying to talk about that and like unpack like the different reasons that people might be attracted to horror media. And again, that's like a topic that you're probably not going to encounter in very many other classes, but all of the students who end up in that class are enthusiastic about it. I'm enthusiastic about it. And so hopefully that like shared enthusiasm, like it's like, oh, you know what? College classes are cool.
Right.
Learning new things can be cool and exciting and fun. And it doesn't always have to be like, intimidating or an insurmountable challenge. Right. So we're gonna take a smaller topic, a more interesting topic, and we're gonna kind of do this enthusiastic exploration of it. So that's one of our goals. And then another goal is typically to kind of help students to develop some of the skills that they need to be successful college students. So, we do talk about things like, test taking strategies and how to be a more effective writer. And all of that is sort of woven within the class material. So we try to hit a bunch of different goals through that one program.
Yeah, because I know I kind of, adjunct faculty and career services, and I find that so many times there's that crossover where, I'm talking about why you need to take notes.
Yep, that is a big topic that tends to come up.
It's just I'm in lecture, everybody's there, they're listening, but nobody's taking notes, and it's like, I publish the lectures on Canvas, but you have to learn to take notes because you go, and it's not just success in college. It's success in whatever professional endeavor they want, because you go to meetings, you sit there and you're just a spectator and you're not taking notes. All of a sudden people will start to kind of question, why do we need you there? And then it's like, there are people with photographic memories. Assume you're not one of them.
Right.
It's
like, it's very, very rare for people to have like that good of a memory. Right. So
and
most of us have very bad memories.
Right.
I mean, and that's just the human condition, right?
And so then it's just all that, because I've just seen it, and I've lived so many mistakes where I just was listening, thinking I had it all.
Need this later, and then the next week it's like, oh no, we're
I get called on. Yeah, it's like, where are you on that? And it's like, and it doesn't end well.
It doesn't end well. No, it's a really good habit to get into, and it is one of those things that like, we talk about the importance of that, and then some of that will also just be, those failures we talked about when we were talking about helicopter parenting. Like sometimes you just need to have not taken notes, and then realize that you really did need to have taken those notes to learn that lesson.
So then, Core 100, it culminates with the group presentation, right?
Yeah. So we call that that kind of conference that happens at the end of the year. We call it HATS, right?
Yeah.
So they're all of the Core 100 groups. They all come together. They will give like interesting presentations about the various topics of their courses. So we get like posters typically, and then I'm always interested to see like what other additional things people will do. I mean, we've had people making crepes in their HATS presentations, and we've had people make homemade chocolates before. This year we had people handing out like tattoos that they had designed in their class. So there's always like something cool that people are doing in addition to those posters, and it's a really good opportunity to kind of see like what have these students kind of picked up over the course of the semester, and like how are they integrating that into things that they'll hopefully take past Core 100.
That was my first day at Lyon. Was 3 years ago, and I went to Hats that night, and it was just so awesome.
I think it's a great introduction to Lyon.
Yeah, it was just because it's like all these students doing all this cool stuff, and I'm and I'm just getting in the conversations. I'm kind of going into full dad mode. Wanting to just learn everything about it. But that was my first like real major impression when I was here at the school, and it's like, this is gonna work out.
I think it's a good first impression. For
sure. So then you basically you just pick you line up like here are all the classes that we're gonna need 18 faculty or staff, and then you just populate it because I know you offered me an opportunity, but I kind of couldn't do it. I got it on my hit list for the fall.
For subsequent fall.
Yeah. I just think that's so great. So is Core 100 then? Is it graded, or is it just or pass fail, or how do you evaluate success in a class like that?
Yeah, I mean we've tried different models of it. I think at one point before my time, it was a pass fail class. As long as I've been in charge of the program, it's been a graded class. So you get your A through F grade on it.
Yeah.
I think most students do pretty well in Core 100, but it is a graded class. And we've worked on how can we incorporate things like that HATS presentation into like overall assessing the program and how successful it is. So
one thing this is near the tail end of the podcast, but it should have been at the beginning that it's belated congratulations, but you've received tenure here, right?
That's right. Yeah. So starting this fall, at least, I'll have associate rank and tenure.
Yeah. Is it going to go to your head, or are you going to stay the same Rob that we know?
I think I'll stay the same, but I am excited about hitting tenure and getting that promotion. It's always good.
Well deserved. Yeah, that's great. One kind of closeout is what's the emerging fields? Where's psychology going? Like everybody throws in some AI pixie dust, or is it there's other things, but where, like in your mind, where do kind of what trends or fields are emerging in the whole big world of psychology?
It's an interesting question for sure. I mean, I hate to say the AI thing,
of
right?
course,
everybody does, but I mean, it is going to be interesting to kind of see like how people interact with those sorts of tools as we. I've got a student right now in senior thesis, for example, who's like looking at she's working on a project looking at like how AI is being or machine learning, right, is being integrated into looking at job applications and what that process is, and also like how students are looking down when they start their careers and when they start applying for jobs, they're going to have to like wrestle with machine learning sorting through their resumes and maybe even interviewing them in some cases, and like what are their perceptions of that? How do they feel about it? Do they feel like they're being well prepared for that? So that's of course a developing area that's going to be, I think, pretty interesting. In my specific subdiscipline, things that I think are pretty interesting, there's been that like recent trend of like so-called gentle parenting, kind of I think like a almost in backlash to like more authoritarian, like more helicopter hands-on sorts of parenting. I'm curious about that. I haven't looked into it too much, but it's on my radar. It always comes up in my parenting class. The last couple of years, people have been like, well, what about that trend? And I'm like, I don't know, maybe it's just permissive parenting. Yeah. Maybe it's something else, probably a thing that we do need to look into and like figure out, is it distinct from other parenting styles that we've looked at so far? Right. Is it good for kids? Yeah. So I'm curious about that as well in my area.
Well, real good. Well, thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
This has been great.
It's been a good conversation.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's what we hope for. Yeah. So before I sign off, I always ask one question, producer Cheyenne. What is that question that I normally ask?
where can you find the Career Pathways podcast?
And the answer is
You can find us on 99.97% of all podcasts, supposedly the same amount of germs that get killed with Germ-X.
yes. She has to put that qualifier because we got called out by a couple of the biologists in the past. So we want to make sure we're factually accurate. But thank you, Rob.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Cheyenne, and thank you for coming and listening or watching the Career Pathways podcast. We hope that you visit us each week. We also hope you subscribe, and we really hope that you give us a great review. Just give us a 5-star review. Mention producer Cheyenne as the highlight of the episode. That would be very appropriate. So take care, and we hope to see you next week. Bye.
This broadcast is sponsored in part by Lyon College and by KILT Studios.